For millennia, countless cultures have revered the elegantly beautiful, mysterious labyrinth. It's been a doorway where they've talked to their gods, balanced the land, and healed the mind, body, and soul. Not to be mistaken with confusing mazes with their many paths, dead ends, and false passageways. The unicursal or one-path labyrinth, perfectly balanced with an equal number of left and right turns, relaxes the mind and invites us forward. And now there is a worldwide revival of interest in this ancient form. In growing numbers, people are gathering in groups and at labyrinth conferences such as these to try to unravel these puzzles from our ancient past. And what we're uncovering are pathways to even greater mysteries. Labyrinths seem to be sacred containers of profound magic and numinous powers, which affect us personally, spiritually, and environmentally.
It's a temple that awakens our awareness of our destiny, or helps us remember, why are we here? And it's like man's search for meaning, or humanity's search for meaning, I think, can be found by walking the labyrinth.
I think what we're finding now with this current awakening in the use of labyrinths and interest in labyrinths is timed because we're ready for it. We're poised for an age of new enlightenment. And so I see the labyrinth as a vehicle, if you will, to help us through that passageway. The labyrinth is a meeting place for geomancy, for sacred geometry, and for mysticism. And so people come to labyrinths from any of those angles. And labyrinth seems to be a container that holds all of the mysteries of all of those elements together.
I walked the labyrinth without any information, without even a drop of knowing the difference between a maze and a labyrinth, and I had an ecstatic experience. I had to be in this moment. There is no past, there is no future, there is just right now. And this is an experience that we do a kaleidoscope of things to achieve. And I had it purely from putting one step in front of the other and following a pattern. I think that's something the whole world should know about.
And I have been looking at labyrinths for the last 20 years now. I started back in 1976 when I just stumbled across one of the ancient medieval turf labyrinths in England, quite by chance, while attending an astronomy conference. And we went and walked around this turf labyrinth on the top of St Catherine's Hill on the outskirts of the city of Winchester. And we walked around this thing and thought, well, this is clearly a maze. It's laid out like a maze, but it's cut flat into the ground. And you walk from the entrance and you reach the centre, but there's no choice in pathways. Why? And we went to the Tourist Information Office and asked them what it was, and they just said, well, it's the Miz Maze, but what is it? And they said, well, don't know. So we went to the museum and we said to them, what is it? And they said, we don't know. So I thought, well, okay, here's something to do for a few years or for a few lifetimes. But back to the story. Over the next couple of days, I'm going to show you where I've been, basically, in the last 20 years. I've travelled all over the world looking for labyrinths.
Many people think that there's just two different types of labyrinths, the classical and the medieval or Chartres type. But in fact, there's many different types of labyrinths, and it's been a natural progression over the course of this last 3,000 years or more. You've got the classical and the medieval, but there's the types that fall in between. And then from the medieval labyrinths, they were developed over quite a short period of time into the hedge mazes, the puzzle mazes, which people are familiar with from amusement parks and theme parks and so on from around the world.
This is a clay tablet from Pylos, a palace, Mycenaean palace in southern Greece. This object dates to 1200 BC, give or take 10 years.
We can be quite precise about that. And as you can see, there's no question, that's the labyrinth design. The entrance is down here, and you come in and you follow the pathway round, and eventually you end up at the centre. In the first couple of centuries BC, the town of Knossos, which by this time had been rebuilt on a different site nearby by the forerunners of the Romans, started to issue coinage, and harking back to the traditions of the Minotaur, they put on the back of their coins labyrinths. The labyrinth first appeared, at least 3,000 years ago, we think around the shores of the Mediterranean, and initially it was just a symbol in a mythology. It occurs carved on rock faces, and on pottery, and various odd items, and at first it just seems to be a myth, a legend, but then gradually it developed and turned into real walkable labyrinths on the ground. Many of these labyrinths over the years have been used as a sign or a symbol for protection. A number of them, particularly the Roman examples for instance, are situated near doorways into buildings, and this is a common theme from around the world, that many labyrinths are seen as a protective symbol or device. One of the themes that's common with all of these labyrinths around the world is that they're used as a game and as a dance, and you can find this wherever you look in the world. Particularly children have danced around them and used them as a game, sometimes just something simple scratched into the sand, other times a complex dance with set rules and costumes. But wherever you look in the world, all of the different labyrinth traditions all hold the labyrinth to be some kind of sacred city, or the mountain at the centre of the tribal lands. You can look at the legends of Troy and of Knossos and of Babakavarai and Itoi here in Arizona, of Shamali's house in Afghanistan, of Skimangarda in the foothills of the Himalayas in Nepal. They're all ancient cities or fabled holy places that are central to the mythology of each particular culture, and each of those occurrences is connected with the labyrinth. The labyrinth always shows the plan of the city or the path that leads to that central goal in the culture and the mythology. And wherever you look, you'll find this same story. Often they'll use local heroes and they'll use local landmarks, but it's always that same core element to the story. All of these different ways of using labyrinths from around the world show that there are many various interpretations of the labyrinth. In Scandinavia, it's reported that they've been used to control the weather and to ensure good luck when fishing. In Europe, they've been used in the churches and cathedrals, it's been suggested, as a substitute for pilgrimages. Here in America, it symbolises the sacred mountain at the centre of the native tribal lands and the pathway that leads to the top of the mountain where the spirits of the founding fathers live. Here in America, they tell the story of Itoi, the man in the maze, and how he travels this long, complex pathway that leads up to the top of the sacred mountain, Babakavarai, which is actually down in southern Arizona, where he lives. This design of the man in the maze, Itoi, is shown not only on their basketry, but also on the labyrinths here, on the jewellery, widely used as a symbol amongst the Pima and the Tohono O'odham in Arizona. But the labyrinth seems to be confined almost exclusively to Arizona in the Americas, a few in New Mexico and northern Mexico, but it doesn't seem to occur anywhere else.
When people walk a labyrinth, they experience one of its most perplexing mysteries. Thousands of people report that when used as a tool, labyrinths seem to have an ability to expand our spirit, focus our mind, and improve our health and sense of well-being.
And what we discovered every time that we were dowsing someone before and after walking a labyrinth was that their energy field around their body was expanding. And it was going from where it normally is to 2 or 3 times larger. They all come back and say, I felt centered and balanced, more myself. And I listen to that and I say, oh, what's going on here is they're becoming whole. They're becoming a bigger person. They're expanding into their larger self, which would be the soul.
I feel a buoyancy and an exhilaration and definitely a lightness. Yeah, and I could feel it happening at various places. There are various places in there that I could feel the energy kept building.
That's the distance from me to you where your aura has expanded to. What is that, 40 feet?
More 50 feet.
Really? Yeah, it's wonderful.
Most people are fooled by the form and shape of things. And one of the illusions in this world is that we are a bunch of individuals just walking around and that we stop right here, somewhere here. And in fact, we go much further. We have an energy body, we have auras, we have a spirit, and so forth. And I think what the labyrinth shows is that not only do we have that, but that there are certain things that we can do to enhance that. And one of the things is to be balanced. And what the labyrinth really does for people is to put us back into balance. And in this culture, in this society especially, we get really imbalanced. We put so much time and effort into work, into certain parts of our lives, and tend to overdo that side and don't do too much of something else. But the labyrinth, because it has an equal number of turns and because of the way it's designed and the way we walk it, it restores a certain amount of balance to us, and that balance increases our energy and is expressed in our auras. So I think that the labyrinth shows us that in our natural state we are much more than we might think that we normally are.
As an artist and a labyrinth builder, I've had hundreds of experiences and stories told to me about the power of the labyrinth and the significant changes it makes in people's lives, and also its healing aspects. I'd like to tell you about a story of a child who, well, actually a 13-year-old boy, who helped me build the labyrinth with a class of students. And this child had never spoken a full sentence in his life. After walking the labyrinth, helping me build it, walking it once in a blessing of the labyrinth, he walked toward lunch and he yelled out, "I wish I could come back after lunch, but I have health class." So something shifted in his ability to speak. I don't know what that magic is or how that mystery works, but that he was able to speak a full sentence meant that something shifted in his thinking ability, in the way he was balanced. Just before coming to this conference, I received a letter from a woman that I built the labyrinth for a number of months ago, and a minister and his wife came to walk the labyrinth, and he was blind and he had Parkinson's. And as they walked in, she held him up and literally eased him through the labyrinth. By the time he was walking back out with her, they were simply holding hands. So again, there's that shift in the body's ability to heal itself when it's in an environment of healing.
I'm an art therapist and a nurse. I created the labyrinth in my garden for myself. But what I found out, it attracted many people. Hundreds of people have come to walk the labyrinth as groups, as part of ritual. People come to problem solve. I have a lot of meetings at my house now that people don't want to meet anywhere else because they find the labyrinth so useful, and even like board meetings. We go walk it, we come back, and the answers to the issues, the problems that we're facing are real authentic and available. Not too long ago, someone called me on the phone, and they said that after they learned how to draw the labyrinth, they did it every time before they went to sleep at night, and they had a sleeping disorder, and now they're able to go to sleep. Another woman came with a group of her loved ones and family, her husband, and friends, and they did a healing ceremony for her because she was going to have a mastectomy. And she went in the center of the labyrinth, and I received a beautiful card from her later thanking, and her surgery went well. She's doing quite well, and this was one of the tools she used.
One of the powerful experiences I had with the labyrinth was last year at the first Labyrinth conference. We walked that 7-path labyrinth, which was outdoors on a water dome, for the 5 days of the conference, and we would douse our energy fields at different times as the days passed. And By the end, our energy field had expanded to where we were almost like a football field away from one another to read it on the dowsing rods. And so I thought that was really a real tangible way of showing the expansion of energy. But what I was really amazed by when I got home is that I found that it really shifted time. I felt like it expanded time for me for about 2 weeks. And that as a body worker, as a massage therapist, and working in hour increments, I had a really hard time tracking time by the clock. But I found myself doing much slower, more methodical work and consistently ending up with more time to do additional work in each session. Because we have so much information coming at us at such a fast rate that it's hard for our nervous system, with the World Wide Web and everything else, that everything is changing so fast that our nervous systems are having a hard time keeping up with what is going on. And for many reasons, I believe that the Labyrinth is really going to help keep us in a more balanced state. It's going to help us take in this information in a way that our nervous systems can handle it and keep us in a more peaceful state. And that, I think it also really expands our energy and our thought as we walk the Labyrinth, and also collects the collective consciousness, that it brings us together on the level of the collective consciousness.
I started out walking it alone, and actually have started walking it with 2 other women from my class, and we're working on our dissertations. And we go to the Labyrinth wherever we're stuck, and with intent and respect for the sacred space, we take our questions and walk the Labyrinth. Afterwards, we will spend time together sharing what we have come up with, what's been revealed to us. And it not only has helped move us out of stuck places in our dissertation process, but it's actually deepened our dissertation process.
One of the places, for example, in which people that have walked labyrinths that I've installed have had a particularly effective interaction is with grieving. I've had on more than one occasion someone who said that they're grieving the loss or the illness of a loved one, walked the Labyrinth, and it relieved their grieving, and it made them feel better, and it gave them some kind of insight and some kind of perspective on it all. So in hospitals, for example, or in prisons, or in places where people are in extreme personal anguish, I think that labyrinths would offer a source of relief at no cost.
Labyrinths can be miraculous and wonderful tools for transformation no matter how they are used. In August of '95, I had been invited to take the Labyrinths to a conference on creativity in St. Petersburg, and I went with my partner Elaine Foster, and we were able to present the Labyrinth at a workshop one morning. It was the first time the Russian people had experienced it. And what was so wonderful was the fact that although we had translators for the lecture part, the experience of walking the Labyrinth is so fundamental that it needs no translation. So even people who came later in the week, in the mornings, when we had it open before the opening of the conference schedule, people could come as a meditation and walk before breakfast and had no introduction at all. They would just get it. It was absolutely wonderful. It really kinesthetically got through. There was no need for language. It was an extraordinary experience.
What took place was the Labyrinth provided a real centering and containing place for the people who have been so repressed and silenced in not only to live their spirituality, but to talk about it. And it was a very safe place. And so it provided a way for a lot of releasing, a lot of crying, a lot of sharing that I don't believe would have taken place without it.
To help unlock the ancient mysteries of the Labyrinth, the rediscovered field of sacred geometry provides some clues. Suddenly, our once limited understanding of labyrinths has taken a quantum leap.
Because sacred geometry says that you take sort of undifferentiated energy, and by forming it in certain patterns, you get material creation, you get things, you know, that you can see and touch and feel. So it organizes energy in a way that becomes useful to us. And the labyrinth does the same thing. It's always been an amazement to me to go out into a park where there was nothing, to put a labyrinth there. People walk around on the same ground they were walking around before as a park, but now in a particular pattern, and all kinds of wonderful things happen to them. And in both directions, and also happens to the earth. It's organizing the energy that's available to all of us from ourselves and from the earth in a way that it becomes useful to us.
Another one of the very common experiences that people report walking the labyrinths is that they come out much more alive. And I started looking at the pattern that the people were creating when they were walking the labyrinth. And those patterns turn out to be the same patterns that are in nature that allows life to do everything that it does to create, sustain, and support life. And some of those patterns are even visible when you look at the labyrinths, because all the labyrinths are based on a meander pattern. And when you walk the labyrinth, you're going clockwise, and then you go around a corner and you go counterclockwise, and you go back and forth, clockwise, counterclockwise, left and right turns. It's a basic meander pattern, just like you find in rivers. And the same thing happens to flowing water going through the meander and the spiraling eddies and all the various patterns in water. Those are credited with filtering, oxygenating, purifying, and recharging the water so that it's really living water. When we walk a labyrinth, we are being guided to dance in the same way that water dances flowing off the land in the streams. So, as far as I'm concerned, when you walk a labyrinth, you are being taken through these extremely basic patterns that support life. And so they vitalize you. But not only is that going on, you are being taught or shown what those patterns are. Not through your mind, but through the movement of your body. It's a kinesthetic experience. The reason that I brought sacred geometry to a labyrinth conference, which may seem like, what? Why? Is there a connection here? Well, one of the easiest connections is that in order to see the patterns in the labyrinths, people have to learn how to recognize patterns. And in general, in our culture, that is not something that we learn. Our education system is not really based on recognizing relationships or on patterns. It's more on information and facts and figures, things like that. There's a whole other world out there, a whole other way of looking at the world, which is looking at your hand or looking at a leaf and seeing, oh my goodness, this one is a six-pointed star, or this is hexagonal geometry, or this, the relationships in this is pentagonal. Or most people look at those things and never see any of that, and yet it's right there. The deeper goal beyond that is that then in that physical form that you can see, there are invisible geometries and geometrical relationships that created the physical form. So it's like my goal was to go backwards, one step at a time, into more and more subtle realms so that they could understand the foundation of the entire universe that we're living in, right from the Big Bang or the pure geometry creation of the universe right up to your own hand. One of the things that really fascinates me about sacred geometry is that if you think of it as a language, it's a non-temporal language. It's a language that can never be lost because the language is a translation of the patterns and relationships and proportions in nature, or in life, as I prefer to say. Nature and life are interchangeable to me. And nature means the essence of something. So the essence of anything, it turns out, is in the relationships. The relationships are a creation or a result of proportions. So it doesn't matter what it is that we're looking at. That is the most beautiful dragonfly I've ever seen. Red body, yellow wings, and its body is completely composed of golden mean relationships and nothing else. And each of these proportions, in this case, is golden mean relationships. Each one of them has a meaning, and the meaning is not arbitrary. It comes from nature itself. It comes how that proportion functions in the body of the dragonfly or the human being or anything. The golden mean is the principle of organic growth, and it guides the staged growth or the process of growth of any organism. And that's the meaning of the golden mean. And the specific way that it guides the growth is that it allows each stage of growth to be related to the previous stage in the same way as that's related to the stage before that. So they're all related in the same way, and there's one symphony, and this is how geometry is used to give identity to something, and so you can remember who you are. And that's just the golden mean. So each of these proportions has a different meaning. It's not arbitrary. All you have to do is study the manifestations of that proportion in physical form, and you'll eventually come to what that proportion means. It's exactly the way that proportion is used in nature, and then we can translate that as a meaning. So the golden mean has one of the translations of what that means is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That is how the golden mean is used in nature, to create one segment of growth that does to the next segment as that segment did to the original one. Do unto the other as you want it to do to the first one, to you. We can still rediscover what they were onto and what guided them just simply by looking at our own hands, or by looking at trees, or the patterns in water as it flows and makes eddies and whirlpools down the stream. It's all there in the world around us because that's where they found it. And all we have to do is to go back to their source, which is eternal and always there for us. It's always accessible. So the good news is it can never be lost. The bad news is the only way it can be rediscovered and found again or remembered is if your heart is open. You're in touch with your feelings, and you are aware of the world that you're looking at, not just looking at it, but actually seeing it. And so that's why I do geometry exercises. It's a way of reawakening your ability to see what you're looking at, to recognize patterns. The sphere is really the first thing that nature did. It's the easiest way to, and most efficient way, to encompass space. The sphere encompasses, when you think of it as a bubble of air, like a soap bubble, it encompasses space using the least amount of material to do that. Okay? So it's very efficient, and I will use this term efficient or economical a lot because it turns out that that's what supports life, not wasting anything. So atoms, the whole universe, this basic shape of the sphere of a ball is what nature would most like to do. It's the simplest way of doing everything. So molecules try to become spherical, etc. Another pattern has lots of different names. It's an explosion, like in fireworks, or another word for it is radial patterns, which is what we'd call it when we see it in flowers, like dandelions. And of course, every time there's an explosion, like throwing a stone into a pond, there are ripples. So it's a part of that pattern. You could call it two different patterns, but they really, one is created by the other. So the concentric rings, or ripples. Next pattern, meander. We're all familiar with that one from rivers and streams meandering. Branching, and we'll go into that more. We know mostly from trees. Alternation is a pattern I've added to the list that other people have made, and I find that one to be really important, and it shows up in many of these other patterns. Many of these overlap. But alternation is the basic idea of this and that, yes and no, on and off, yin and yang. 1 and 0, basic binary system. Yes. And close packing, it's may at first sound like kind of a funny name, but what it means is that nature likes to take these spheres, and when they need to cluster together to form molecules, to get them as close together as possible. And so nature packs these together closely. And the honeycomb is a good example of that, where everything is packed together as close as possible, not wasting any surface area, any materials to enclose those spaces. And the spiral and the helix, those two are often confused, and when we talk, for instance, about spiral staircases, they are actually helical staircases. So we'll go into the difference between these, but there's an image there to start with. So where are these patterns in the labyrinths? Are all those patterns found in labyrinths? Well, let's go exploring. You can see right away, the meander is probably the first one that I saw. There are these meanders turning back and forth through the labyrinths. It's actually what the labyrinths are all based on. It's one of the major pieces of it. So here we are with a plan of it. And of course, it's all meanders, built out of meanders, but I just highlighted a few spots and to see them well. And in the medieval labyrinths, the meander is easiest to see where it's real tightly packed around the center. Looks very much like a snake meandering at that point. Very fascinating thing here of just extending that basic pattern around in a circle on one side, coming back to the center again and extending on the other side to show that you can go from meander to seventh circuit labyrinth. Isn't that wonderful? So there is a meander in there that created that, if you go back to the origin, one possible origin point for it. The meander we're most familiar with in streams, and life uses the meander with the flow of water to moderate the speed of the water, to make it not too fast and not too slow. Because if it's too fast, it washes things away, you get a lot of erosion, you lose your soil, you can't grow any food because the soil's been taken away. If it's too slow, you can't drink the water. So you want water to be in between at a moderate rate of flow, and the meander slows down the water. When you drop you drop a drop of water into some still water, it creates first that explosion like the milk drop that we saw. And then, of course, some of the water, the drop moves down below the surface into the water and creates a little upside-down mushroom cap. This is, and you can just barely see here, actually, right side up, okay? There's a little mushroom cap and these two little spirals, just like an ionic column on a Greek temple. And that expresses particular geometry. It's very precise. It's not arbitrary. The next thing that happens as the water moves down is that these little jellyfish-like threads are formed. And how many of them are there? 7. So, and this 7 is one of the inherent numbers, part of the identity of water, flowing water and flowing air. Okay, so there are 7 of these. If I take a picture across here, we get patterns like this, and we're approaching the mandalas that we're going to be drawing. And you can count this and see that there are 7 of these little lobes. And here's the difference between living water and dead water with chlorine in it and sewage and the kind of stuff we drink. It just has this ripples and no exquisite pattern of geometry in it. Okay. So the 7 rings are, I think, very important. It's why I'm concentrating on the 7th Circuit Labyrinth, because of all these connections.
This relationship between meander patterns, labyrinths, and water points to another profound mystery of labyrinths. It has both the ancient promise and future potential to affect our water systems and balance Earth energies. Myths of some ancient people who lived on marshy land tell of guardian spirits instructing them to build labyrinths, which affected their drainage and weather patterns, making the land arable and able to sustain life.
And we're beginning to find many examples where it benefits the Earth as well. Possibly bringing the presence of water to that site under the Earth to affect the way things grow that are planted within a labyrinth. It reminds me a little bit of things they did a while back with pyramids, and they discovered there was pyramid energy and so forth. Well, this is labyrinth energy, and it's real, and it has an effect that we can verify that wasn't there before we organized it into that particular location and form. What we saw the other day with the labyrinth was very specific that before we put it there, there was just sort of general undifferentiated land. And when we were finished, and people had walked it and we measured the aura of the labyrinth itself, that there was an aura there of some 25 feet. And we were expressing that by the end of the conference, we may be standing in the lake in order to measure it afterwards, because as we continued to walk the labyrinth, the aura of the labyrinth itself would increase. The energy in that particular place would actually increase, which gives us an idea of what happens in spiritual sites also, you know, where pilgrims keep going there and walking there and praying there or whatever. The energy of that place grows, and then people continue to benefit, as does the Earth itself.
Every time someone walks a labyrinth, they're bringing their loving, focused attention to that space, and it actually feeds the Earth. The vibration of our focused attention is the same vibration as love. And as that love vibration goes into the Earth on the energy on which the labyrinth is placed, then the Earth can take that energy and use it to heal herself as well. So that if you're concerned about the underground nuclear testing and you walk your labyrinth, you can send love to that space and help her heal from those wounds. So it's a two-way street. It's not everything for us. It's like another way in which we can give back to our Earth.
Through this whole process, a lot of change and transformation takes place. And you know, I don't understand it, but I've seen the changes not only in the people, but what happens to the land itself, where the labyrinths are. And there's there's an interchange of energy that takes place, and I really believe it's on the level of love and intention and the energy that's used for both. And this is somehow the mystery and the healing of the labyrinth, and I just think it's just terrific, and I'm so blessed to have it in my life.
According to dowsing experts like Marty Kane, after a labyrinth is built on land which has had little or no water, a water dome actually begins forming. Dowsers believe that the energetic spiral draws up the water into a dome, and it pours back, creating underground rivulets. This allows wells to be built nearby.
When you look at a labyrinth, it looks so complicated that most people think, well, gee, we could never make one of those or put one of those in our school or do something, because it would be very difficult and time-consuming. So my purpose really is to explain to people the few little bits of geometry and tools and techniques that will allow them to build these easily, so that they can, in fact, get out there somewhere, that there will be as many people as possible building them and putting them in these places, and that in that way they will proliferate as rapidly as possible. This is that process in which you start with a cross, and in the case of a 7-circuit labyrinth, with one corner and then a dot. And this, as you can see, is a rectangular formation if you make it with the cross with equal arms. And then you begin to connect the elements together. And the very first one that you connect will form the center of the labyrinth. That's going to end up being the center of the labyrinth. And depending on which direction you make that first line, you'll have either a left-handed or a right-handed labyrinth. In this case, since we're going to the right, this is the center, and the cross is to the left of center, and therefore it will become a left-handed labyrinth, and when we're finished, the labyrinth's first turn will be to the left. If instead you drew this first line this direction, then the center would be here and the cross would be to the right of center, and it would be a right-handed labyrinth, and your first turn would be to the right. So after you begin with the first one, you just subsequently take each additional element, just take the next one on the left, and you connect it with the next one on the right, and you keep going around, and when you're finished, you will have the 7-circuit labyrinth. Now, it's not clear to the average person just looking at a 7-circuit labyrinth that there's a square in the middle of this labyrinth, because it's made out of rounded lines. But that square is the key to not only the geometry, but to laying out the labyrinth.
This is what's called the seed technique for drawing a labyrinth. First, we draw a cross. Next, we draw right angles in each of the quadrants of the cross. After we've drawn the angles, then we put a dot in each quadrant. Now, this is the only point in drawing a labyrinth with the seed technique where you need to make a decision, because either you can go from the center, the top of the cross, to the right or to the left, and that'll determine whether, when you enter the labyrinth, whether you go to the left or the right. So I'm going to start here at the top of the cross, and I'm going across to the top of this first angle. Then I move back to the top of the angle on the left, coming over to the dot. I move back to the dot, come around, and pick up the bottom of the angle I first connected with. I move over here to the end of this angle on the left, and come around and meet with the center of the cross. Moving to the left, I pick up the end of the cross here, I come around, and I meet to the angle here. Moving over to the left again, I pick up the angle, and I end with the dot. Coming to the left, I pick up the dot, come around, and end on an angle, and finally, starting on the angle, we go all the way around and end at the base of the cross. So again, we start by making a cross, then placing 4 angles in to the quadrants, and we place a dot in each quadrant, and then starting at the top of the cross, you can go to the right or to the left, and then follow through. I went from the left to the right here, so then again, left to the right, left to the right, left to the right, and continuing that process, we make a 7th circuit labyrinth.
I'm teaching other people how to build rope labyrinths because it uses up no resources at all. It's completely reusable. You lay a rope down, and when you're done, you pick it up, and you can use it again next time. So there's literally no cost other than original purchase of the rope itself. So it makes it accessible. And putting a rope labyrinth up is so easy and takes so little time that it ought to be a way that anyone could walk labyrinths. I mean, schools could do it during the day and walk it for a single class, or you can do it in the evening for a single meeting for just a couple of hours and then take it down again.
During the medieval period, the intricate new labyrinth pattern at the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Chartres, France, captured everyone's imagination, and it became the other main labyrinth pattern. The Chartres pattern has 11 paths, 4 quadrants, and many concentric full circles, a 6-petal center, and 112 lunations in a halo around its perimeter.
Chartres Cathedral is one of the most magnificent examples of the use of sacred geometry to create an enclosed space, a temple, that has within it the order of the cosmos. I would have to call it a three-dimensional cosmological mandala. A cosmological mandala, to be a valid one, has to hold within it the geometry that generated the universe, these harmonic vibrations that were the first thing created as the universe started to unfold. All of those proportions, the square root of 2, the 1 to square root of 2 relationship, the 1 to square root of 3, the 1 to square root of 5, the golden mean, these 4 building blocks of the universe that we know and live in, are right there guiding all the segments of the growth. You're getting taught how the universe was created. And that takes you back to the creation and the creator. And it works as a temple because one of the metaphors we use in sacred architecture, sacred geometry, is the divine looks at this, sees that there's all the root harmonies that created the universe, and says, oh, I recognize myself, and comes and lives, and it becomes an abode of the divine, which is what a temple is supposed to be. And then you put a labyrinth on the floor of it as well, which is a microcosm of that cosmological mandala, and you can actually walk the path, and by walking the path, your body is moving through and experiencing all of those patterns that create and sustain life.
It was adopted for specifically religious use when used in a cathedral. The church itself, because God was the creator and created everything, was a virtual encyclopedia of everything that existed. It was called the City of God, and it represented heaven on earth. And in the labyrinth in Chartres Cathedral, it's the most elegant expression of this, where it represents all of creation, and by walking it puts us in touch with that creation. So it represents both the path to the creation itself and an expression of the overall goal that we're seeking.
Some labyrinth experts are looking at the different energies and uses between the two main labyrinth forms, and they're designing ways to interact with the labyrinth, along with creating inspiring meditations.
Chartres pattern was specifically Christian in origin. It didn't exist until the Christian era. That it has been used more for meditation and an overtly spiritual purpose, whereas the Seventh Circuit Classic, being older and predating Christianity and going back to ancient times, has often been used much more for a really grounding effect to get us in touch with the earth and the solar system and ourselves and our intuition and all of these things. So while you may be able to do that from either one of them, this kind of division and use seems to be developing for people using one or the other.
It's important to remember there's lots of different kinds of labyrinths, and I have worked mostly with the Seventh Circuit unicursal or single path labyrinth, mostly because it's the most common one in the world, found in all cultures and all time periods. But the other reason is that people respond to that labyrinth when I set out a variety of different types. That's the one they get drawn to. So that tells me there's something extra special about that one. That also tells me, as well as it's the most common one, which is also a clue, a hint. But the experiences I got is that people started to tell me that transformations were happening as they walked the labyrinths, that certain things were coming up for them, and certain problems, concerns, issues in their life. I don't feel enough love, I don't feel like I have enough money. And I would ask them where that happened, and it happened in specific zones within these 7 zones that are created by the 7 left and right turns in this 7th Circuit Labyrinth. What I found really intriguing was that the sequence that the labyrinth takes you through these different zones, if you correlate them with the 7 chakras, takes you through the chakras, not going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 up the spine. It starts at the willpower center, the third one, goes 3, 2, 1 down to the root chakra, up to the fourth chakra, or your heart chakra, and then jumps up to the top of your head to the crown chakra, and then down to the sixth and the fifth. An extraordinary sequence. I studied yoga. I'd never heard of a sequence like that. It was always the linear kind of model. Well, as a chakra meditation, which I now do just on my own, focusing on the chakras in that sequence, it's extremely powerful, and there's something right about the relationships that are created by doing the chakras, moving through the chakras in that particular sequence. In the middle of that whole pathway, that whole journey into the labyrinth, is the linkage of the first chakra to the fourth chakra to the seventh chakra. That is incredibly common. That is the basis of meditation practices in every single mystical tradition, every single religion that we know of. That absolutely flabbergasts and astounds me, that in this simple labyrinth pattern, we have the roots of all the religions of the world, all the mystical traditions, in the most basic fundamental practice of each one of those. One of the practices I call the tree of life, because I use the imagery of roots going down into the earth for the root chakra and branches up into the sky, and the heart in the trunk of the tree. And it's an image that really works well and helps us to heal this separation and split that we have created in our dualistic paradigm from nature and from everything else. So I think practicing this meditation, whether you do it consciously and sit down and do it, or whether you just simply walk through a labyrinth and don't know what's happening, something is happening inside of you. It's like all the marbles are being thrown up into the air. All your problems are given space to expand and whirl out and be released. And then everything is reorganized according to the order of the cosmos, and you come back into alignment with the energy flowing from your roots to your crown. And I think it's the key to walking through that threshold into our next stage of evolution, to get aligned with Earth and with heaven. And in all the mystical traditions, they say that humanity's destiny is to be the mediators between these two worlds of above and below, inside and outside. And the only way to get there is to open your heart, love yourself, forgive yourself, be compassionate to all sentient beings. And if you do that, automatically this linkage occurs. You start to expand until you were the entire universe and one with it all.
In addition to the Tree of Life meditation, experts have developed suggested ways to use the labyrinth as an experiential tool. Use it as a prayer and ask a question like, what is my next step? What do I need in my life journey? Use it and feel its three energetic stages: release, illumination, and empowerment. Use it for personal healing, self-knowledge, shadow learning, soul assignments, and for initiations like a birthday. Allow your mind to be quiet and see what comes up. Be open. Let your body find its own pace as you walk it. As the mysteries of the labyrinth continue to unfold, more and more people are beginning to use the labyrinth as an ancient sacred tool.
My best guess is that the Seventh Circuit Labyrinth is a temple whose doors are open to initiate us into remembering what our destiny is as a species.
I think the reason more and more people are becoming interested in labyrinths and creating them and sharing them and broadcasting this message is because We need extra tools to help us access these states that are larger than ourselves. We need to find ways to access the divine and ecstatic within ourselves without having to follow lengthy religious paths, without having to take mood-altering chemicals, but to be able to do it in the moment, every day if we want, at any given time.
Once again, here in modern society, the labyrinth has meaning again. In a world where everything moves so fast and there's so much confusion in everyday life, the labyrinth is a sacred space that you can enter and cut yourself off from that outside world. Just somewhere where you can take chaos and bring it to order.